Hi everyone, I'm here today with Kevin Lonnie of KL Communications. This is Tom Anderson, Odin Text Inc., and founder of NGMR Group. Kevin didn't make it to the TMRE this year and was interested in what happened in the NGMR session. And so I offered to give him a walkthrough, and of course, we need to share this with the NGMR community, the analysis that we went through with the survey that NGMR members took. And so this will serve two purposes. So we'll share that, and hopefully you won't mind Kevin and I commenting in our perspectives, viewpoints on these slides. Thanks for joining, Kevin.
My pleasure, Tom. As you said, usually make it down to TMRE. I didn't this year, and I always look forward to your presentation. So I get to play the part of the audience here and interact and ask some questions for you. It should be fun.
Awesome. So let's take a look. So obviously this session, first of all, it was in part to recognize the winners of the NGMR Awards. And so we had three categories. We had Incognito Research as the innovative new startup. They're doing some interesting work in actually using both Uber and other rideshare companies to do field qualitative research while people are en route. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've heard about those guys. That's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they can do research in different countries, obviously, and focus down to a certain neighborhood, and like even nurses coming out of work at a certain hospital in Beijing and stuff like that. So very targeted. And then we have David Lundahl from Insights Now. He was recognized for doing a lot of stuff on I guess you call it clean label, even self-funding research, but really being active and turning heads in that whole industry on how people should think about labels and so forth. So some great work there. And then for the first time, we recognized a client-side company for research method, and it was more than a single research method here. It was just how Merck and Lisa Cortate in particular have created an atmosphere, a culture, a process that allows them to take a chance on new developing methodologies and implement those that work into their process. And so that was interesting, I think much needed to recognize that kind of disruptive innovation as well. So this was what I'll share with you here is the top line, and this is what we went over in our NGMR session on Wednesday after the award ceremony. And it was open to the survey was open to the NGMR group, and I think we had roughly, I'm trying to go by memory right now, it's in here somewhere, 350 or so completes to this survey. The majority did come from the NGMR group. I would guess we had around 50 or so TMRE participants who also took part in the survey, at least. And
How do you do that, Tom? Did you just invite folks when they registered, or did you do it at the conference?
It was a combination. So Blast went out to the NGMR group, and they're always very diligent and about partaking in our surveys. We don't do them often, and they're very short usually. In regards to the TMRE survey, it went out to TMRE signups via email, and also we tweeted it during the conference and so forth. But the majority of the participants here are NGMR members. It's definitely a more US-based skewed sample, as you would expect, typically for both NGMR and TMRE. And it's nice, heavy representation of clients, but also plenty of suppliers. So this survey was very different. You know my passion around text analytics. I wanted a survey that was 95% open comment questions and 5% or less structured questions. And I did break my rule though about keeping this survey short, because this was a 10-minute survey basically, and we should have done a 3 or 5 in retrospect, but we didn't have a clear objective per se, except understand innovation a little bit better, and the innovation is done to death a little bit these days, and so wanted some fun questions. And so not knowing exactly what we were going to get, it was a little bit experimental, and so we added a few extra questions in there than we probably needed, because we actually had 2 or 3 warm-up questions, and they were so interesting that we ended up spending most of the time in this top line and in the discussion on these warm-up questions. So we're going to start there, in fact. And again, I literally had only the night before to analyze these results. So I'm calling this a top line, and we're going to be looking not so much at charts and tables, though you can, of course, instantly create those with good text analytics software like Odin Text, but we're actually going to look more at the visualizations. And of course, they are a little more, visualizations. There's so much data in them, so you can take some time to look at them and interpret them. That's why it's great to have you on the line today, because we can look at them together, maybe get different things out of them. But I think what I was forced into here is a way to very quickly analyze several very complex questions very quickly, and I could see market researchers doing this in the future. This kind of thing, like if you have a presentation the next day in front of the C-suite and you need to get some information quick, why not visualize the data and sort of tell a story around 1 or 2 visualizations? I think maybe that's something in the future. So anyway, we're going to be going over here these top line questions and that were text analyzed, and I'll start with the warm-up questions. And so the warm-up questions, initially we had like 5 little warm-up questions in there, and we ended up deleting 3 of them, or so only leaving 2 or 3. And so let's look at the first warm-up question. What are your hobbies? What makes you tick? What about you, Kevin? What are your hobbies? What do you think?
I would say from top of mind, it's probably like music, sports, movies. I've taken up golf recently, which is something I regret on a daily basis. But I've also, enjoy watching sports, listening to music, things. Those top of my head, and of course reading.
Okay.
Biographies are my favorites.
Nice. I guess for me, I would have to.
How about for yourself, Tom?
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking. I mean, I love travel. Love food. And that combination. I don't have time to read.
They go well together.
Yeah, social media. That's where I read that, and yeah, I wish I had more time to reading. What else?
It's just read, which is kind of ironic, and I won't get us off track any further. But very successful people tend to read about an hour a day, or schedule up to 5 hours a week to read. So.
Well, yeah. I'm trying to work on that.
You and I will both try harder. Okay, so if nothing else, after this session, we'll read something.
We got to read more, yeah. Okay, well, I'd like to see that correlation between reading and income. That would get me going on it more.
There you go.
But so what we actually asked this question. I think it was, what are your hobbies / what makes you tick? And of course, we got. Don't try to field a survey to market researchers, because they're going to beat you up. I knew that going in. You're asking 2 questions here. Which one do you want me to answer, and so forth.
Exactly.
So, yeah. The nice thing, though, about unstructured questions and comments, it's more forgiving. If I agree, you're not supposed to ask double-barreled questions and so forth. But with text analyses, it doesn't matter which one of these you answer or how you answer it. We're going to get how you want to answer it, and that's what's going to be analyzed. But I did get some hate mail about that. All right. So
yeah, you're right about market researchers. They're horrible people to survey.
Yeah, we take a risk with that. So these are experimental surveys. This is for fun. But it's 350 or so responses. It's totally a legit sample here. So, but anyway, so up on the right, we got a quick table of some of the very simple top line results. So reading was number 1. So you said reading. I'm a little lax with my for pleasure reading these days. Everything I read is for work or communication. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, you got to be more well-rounded,
I
Tom.
know, I know. Well, I mean, I've read some of these books you'll see on the next slide. All right,
Okay, that's fine.
here's my favorite travel is number two.
Hmm. Yeah.
And family, I forgot to mention that. Of course, I love being with my family. Everybody
Hmm.
probably does that.
I'm sure they do. That's why it's half the score reading, but I'm sure it's implied. Family's always implied.
Yeah, and then we've got music. You mentioned that. I mean, I like music,
Hmm.
but it doesn't come top of mind for me. Sports that you mentioned that I'm not really a sports fan per se. I did
Mm.
hike 4 hours in the Appalachian Mountains last weekend, so I guess not that I get to do that often, but we've got that there.
That's impressive.
Cooking, watching. This is watching TV,
Oh.
and we've got movies here too. Golf. Your golf came up. I'm not a golfer. I'm like I think Mark Twain said. Golfing is a way to ruin a perfectly good walk.
Yes, it's a good walk spoiled. Yes.
Right, right. Running, definitely not in. I'm not running.
No, no.
No.
Right. Not unless you got to catch a plane.
So I think these. I said top 10 here, but what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Hmm.
9, 10. These two were tied, as you can see, for 10th place: movies and running. And then I
Hmm.
included number 12 just because, wow, work. You know,
Hmm.
and I think maybe that comes down to what makes you tick. But that's a
Hmm.
positive, right? That we appreciate our work, and that's what makes us tick. To see that up there in a question like this is a positive thing, I think.
I would take that as a positive. Is there anything on this chart that surprised you, other
Um,
than work being in the top 12?
I guess maybe not so much, except maybe the rank order, and
Hmm.
that reading. I mean, you think about what are stereotypes for market researchers. We're like a little bit of a geeky bunch, perhaps, and so not not surprised to see reading up
Hmm.
there. Um, what's more interesting, I think, to some degree, is the visualization below. This is
Hmm.
what we call a co-occurrence plot in text analytics in Odin text. And so I'll just explain it. There's two or three visualizations probably we'll be showing here in this deck. And so how to interpret this one is basically terms that are often used together, or issues, or whatever it is we're visualizing, um, get plotted closer together. So you can see over here on the right, we see the spend time with family. And I think color means something here, but I don't remember what we pulled in. Maybe it's sentiment. I'm not sure anymore. Maybe it was tenure or what. I don't remember. So forget about the colors for now. But let's just think about the positioning. So here you can see spending time with family and friends. There's a group of market researchers that mention that, and those who are say talk about spending time with family are also very likely to talk about spending time with friends, even though friends didn't make the top 12 here. Um, but let's look over here to the bottom left. You can see another group of market researchers here who are talking about both playing and watching sports. Specifically, football came up quite a bit. There's a group over here, sort of a little bit further away from the other group, that are talking about soccer. Maybe these are the, well, I guess they would be Americans if they mentioned soccer, or maybe we're pulling both. Yeah, I guess. Well, you got football. There's a connection there, right?
Hmm.
That's so you got
It's
you
like
got
a jock subgroup.
yeah. So you're in this group.
Go
Maybe.
figure.
And here's golf over here. So now this
Oh,
is
look at
interesting.
that. My peeps. Okay.
So golf is closer to sports, right? But it is its own animal, if you will.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah, that's true.
So maybe that means that there's some people who mention golf who didn't mention any of these other sports yet.
Mm.
It was mentioned. There is a sort of it is a closer relationship with sports.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that makes sense. And then we have other groups here. You can see actually, family, friends, spending time with family and friends goes to love walking their dog at home and so forth. So I mean, we can see. So this is a quick way to see that, understand sort of what things go together. Another thing you see here is the biggest thing. You see reading, right? Number one on top, so that should have the biggest node. And right there in inside, right on top of reading, is cooking. So people who read also like to cook. Um, I like to cook. I like reading just my time. So, what does this mean for us? I mean, other than kind of fun to know our profiles and so forth, obviously for both you and I, we're market research, have our own companies. And so, if you want to create advertising messages, right, for targeted at market researchers, it's kind of nice to think about sort of what segments there are. I mean, usually we just think, oh, there's one segment for market researchers, but there's actually, yes, that's true, and you could look at it as one segment, and this is what that segment likes, or you can look at it at, well, there's a couple segments in here, and these are the things that make us tick, including work. All right, that was just a warm-up question. You see how we got like sidetracked into just a fun warm-up question here. Moving on to the next one. TMRE conference, obviously they've got year after year some pretty cool authors presenting. It was Malcolm Gladwell was back again this year. I forgot, was it 2 years ago he was there? They've had Guy Kawasaki.
He seems like he's there about every other year.
Yeah, Seth Godin has been there in the past. A lot of the people I used to have interviewed on the old NGMR blog interviewed Seth Godin over there, Guy Kawasaki. Never interviewed Malcolm Gladwell. But I met Malcolm Gladwell.
But you met with him. I saw it up on your Facebook page.
Yeah, backstage we had a coffee there. But he's an introvert, I think, just like me. Let's just leave it at that. But let's move on. So the question here was, we actually asked two separate questions. So we didn't ask, this is two separate questions instead of one. And I think here's a case where we actually should have just asked, this is the same question. What are your favorite authors and what are your favorite books? Except if you think about it, depending on what I ask you, you might remember the book title. Some people, some other people will remember the author and vice versa. So asking both of these can get you, different results, and both together, of course, are more holistic. And so what we ended up doing here is just merging these two answers together, again, text questions. And so let's look at those results real quick. And this is the same co-occurrence plot. So let's just start. I mean, we've got Stephen Levitt, and I think the other guy's name is Stephen Dubner. They're close together, not because of Steve, the name, but actually they were often mentioned together. So there's a group that are more likely sort of to mention them in our example. Over here to the left, we got Seth Godin, is a big one. I mean, he was the biggest business guru a few years back. I mean, he was number one by far. Interestingly, when I asked to interview him on the NGMR blog back then, he said to me, he politely declined and said, ask me, I'm kind of too busy with interviews and so forth. Ask me again next year. And I think he was just putting me off, And so I put him in my Outlook calendar for exactly 365 days later. And then I replied to that same email I got from him, and I said, Seth, it's 365 days later. You have time for that blog interview now? And so he accepted. Persistence.
He admired your perseverance.
Yeah. So I mean, Jack Trout is over here. He just lives 15 minutes away from here. And I interviewed him as well on the blog. Purple Cow, that's one of Seth Godin's books. Blue Ocean Strategy. We got Reese and
Collins, right?
Yeah, right. I don't know. Is it Collins?
I think it was Collins in Good to Great. It's like create your blue ocean strategy instead of fighting it out in the red-tiered bloody waters of just trying to imitate everyone else.
Yeah, definitely an important meme and concept that is very popular. But it's interesting that the title, the author's name is not here. Here's a case where people remember the book title, but not the author so much. You got I mean, I think I've read all of these books, or at least the Cliff Notes. No, I'm sure I've read the books. And over here
You're
we
talking
got
about how you got through college there too. Okay.
you you have to work fast. Um,
Right.
but Dan Ariely,
And yeah,
he's
predictably irrational.
so there's a link between him and Freakonomics, but he's more often mentioned together with these other guys. Malcolm Gladwell is the biggest one. Probably in this case, I mean, he is a huge super. It looks like he's overtaken Godin in terms of top of mind popularity. Of course, he was also speaking
Hmm.
in that at this conference, so maybe that's why. Um,
Right.
Good to great. I think that's Collins, right? Over here.
Yeah, it is.
But let's move. I'm going to zoom in on this cluster here a bit, and so here we have the same image, really just zoomed in. Malcolm Gladwell over here. Over here, all the way to the right, we got Sandberg is Lean In, right? She's the COO of Facebook, I guess. I bet that's she's a very popular author among both men and women, but
Hmm.
definitely among women.
Right.
Wire, I
Yeah.
see
Yep.
mentioned.
Leading in. Right.
Um, so Simon Sinek is a new sort of a new biggie. Have you read? Are you familiar with him?
I am
Canadian.
not.
He's like into VC innovation. And he's made
Oh
money
yeah.
in software as a service. He's on my
Hmm.
list. I've looked at a couple of YouTube videos of his.
Hmm.
He's got a big ego, though. I think he called himself a unicorn of some sort recently. Um,
All right.
but so anyway, just I didn't post a table here, but the top 5 authors, in case, just make sure you've read all of these: Malcolm Gladwell, Seth Godin, Simon Sinek. That's one that I have to put on my list.
Hmm.
I know Tim Lynch, who I work with, is a big fan of his. This is Thaler. What's his name? Richard Thaler. Over here,
Hmm.
and Al Reese. Al Reese, I highly recommend. Brand positioning. Him and Trout have done some excellent work. It was years ago, but these guys are masters still.
Okay.
Um, and then in terms of 5 books, Thinking Fast and Slow, Freakonomics, Nudge, Good to Great, the classic, and then there were 4 ties for 5th place. Did I say Good to Great twice here? I don't know. My snafu.
That's how good a book it is.
That's how
Okay.
good. Yeah. How Brands
And the
Grow.
7 Habits, right?
Yeah,
That's been
7.
around forever.
That's forever. So you get what you ask for. We didn't say new books or whatever, but I think it's
Right.
good. I know I got to go find a couple of these guys, or not.
It's interesting that they've got like Thomas Friedman there. I usually think of him more for like the New York Times articles, but he does a lot in economics.
Yeah, I like economic. And some market. There's some overlap between economics and market research.
Yeah. And
I
then you
think.
got Clayton Christensen who does all the disruptive, innovation stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him. I'll have to look into him as well. So, I think, again, I think this is helpful for us in terms of knowing what market researchers read. That's the number one hobby. Maybe we need to think
Yeah, that's
about
true.
that when we're blogging or whatever we're doing and so forth. But this is what we should read. So moving on. And I guess this co-occurrence plot means maybe this group of people for whatever reason are more likely to read these books together,
Hmm.
and just a reminder that maybe this bunch of books to go there as well if you haven't. So moving on. So this came out of our warm-up section as well, sort of, and I threw this out to the audience. I don't think that anybody raised their hand, if I remember correctly. It's kind of a trick question, but what is the most successful segmentation scheme of all time? Care to take a guess at that, Kevin?
Well, I probably would have gotten this wrong. Quite frankly, but taking advantage of the fact you actually sent me the notes earlier, uh,
Cheated a little bit.
I'm gonna take a wild guess. It might have something to do with like Myers-Briggs.
Yeah. So yeah. I sent you this PowerPoint, so you peeked ahead in the deck. That's perfectly okay. I would have done the same thing. So yeah, we asked. Again, it was just sort of, I don't know why it was top of mind at the time. Must have seen something on social media when we were putting together this survey, and anyway, just a little bit of background on the Myers-Briggs type indicator for anyone who might not be familiar with it. this, the initial theories came out around 1917, and they were really put into execution uh, during World War II. It was created by a mother-daughter team with no advanced degrees in statistics or psychology. I mean, they both went to college and studied this, and one of them, I think, worked in HR for a while for Macy's or some big department chain at the time. But when they put this into play for World War II, it was meant to help all these women who had to enter the workforce immediately and sort of place them in areas where they were more inclined to succeed, where their interests were, if you will. Influenced by Jung's theories and psychology, in terms of reliability, some people challenge validity and reliability of this test. Do people get typed the same way every year? I mean, I've taken this test a few times since I was in high school, and I've always come up, I think, the same, INTJ, which is a rare type, but I'm not one of these geeks who follow MBTI. I think a lot of moderators are very into this test, or from what I've heard. But you have heard of it before, I guess, or no?
I have heard of it before, and I know I took it back in high school, but quite frankly, it's really fallen off my radar. I understand the idea of, it being used to kind of maybe help figure out what kind of career you should go into. So it was kind of interesting just having the opportunity to take the test for the first time in a few decades and seeing where I ended up. It's kind of a fun exercise.
So what did you just typed yourself? What was the type now that you had?
Well, I came in as a ENFJ, which means I'm I was slightly extroverted, very intuitive, a feeling, and slightly judging guy.
Okay, so
yeah.
We have a few
So I'm
traits.
judging you as you talk right now.
Yeah, well, yeah. Once you start digging into this, you start judging people, or trying to figure out what they are.
Well, there you go.
A lot of information on this stuff, and at first it's kind of off-putting, a four-letter acronym and whatnot. But I asked myself,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, is this disruptive innovation or not, or was it, or is it? How would you interpret it? And well, let's continue with this, and we can come back to that question. But I asked the audience, what is your MBTI type? And I'll say the majority of the room raised their hand that they knew their type. Right? We didn't go. I think I might have asked what a few types were in the room, and the results were similar to what I'm going to show you on the next page. There are 16 different MBTI Myers-Briggs types. Some people do these tests during if they do marriage counseling or something. They're in HR, sometimes they do them. There are now competing tests like the Big Four and so forth that were created by PhDs in psychology who have attacked the Myers-Briggs and say, hey, that's just not psychological enough or whatever. But hey, when we asked this question in the survey, here we've got market research. Almost half of market researchers answered with their specific Myers-Briggs type. Out of 16 different types, they're four-letter. I mean, how do you even memorize something like that? Whereas, in this group that did not answer, what was in there? I mean, we could have broken it out. Didn't bother here, but a few were like, oh, it's been a long time, like you said, since high school, or don't remember, or don't know. And a few people, of course, had to say, hey, this test is no longer valid. There's the four whatever. I think partly those psychologists who developed the new tests are a bit jealous about how their test isn't anywhere near as high awareness as this one, right? So I was curious, getting these results, when we saw, I mean, this was running throughout the TMRE and a few days before because of NGMR group. Also ran it on Google surveys really quick. And so here is, you can field a Google survey in less than 3 days, and this one fielded it a bit faster because it was a simple question, I guess. And A quarter of the general population were able to answer with their exact Myers-Briggs type. I mean, can you imagine? To me, I mean, it's amazing. If I'm a market researcher and I create a segmentation schema, and 100 years from now, half of market researchers are talking about, have internalized and memorized which segment they are in, and discussing whether or not how valid it is. I mean, that's a success in my book.
Mm-hmm.
I
would say so. It means you got your work cut out for you, Tom.
We all do. Some aspirations here to hope for to be the MBTI 100 years from now, or whatever our methodology or technology or whatever we're selling. So here we have it. These were the types then. That the orange bar are the market researchers, and the blue bars. This is from the Myers-Briggs.org site, right? So these are in the U.S. Or whatever general population. So this is, I guess, millions of people. Anybody who's ever taken their test that they know about, and you can see it's sorted here by different, right? So all the way to the left, INTJ. You can see that's supposed to be a very small type, the blue bar, right? Very, what's that percent, I guess, on the left. So we got, just under, like, what is it, maybe 2% of the population or something. But you can see how in this sample, way overrepresented, huge significant difference here. But you got ENTJ, you got ENTP, INFP, INFJ. This is your type, I believe, right here. Is what? No.
Now the EN, right?
ENFJ.
ENFJ.
So also one that is overrepresented in market research compared to what it's supposed to be. And then these are the types that, if you have one of these types, you're less likely to be in market research. But even though it's more in the general population. So let's go a little bit further on this. I had to look up a little bit of this to refresh my memory. Let's just look at the number one. So the number one trait here was this N versus S. And it's how we process information. Do you prefer to focus on the basic information you take in, or do you prefer to interpret and add meaning? This is called sensing or intuition. So intuition is preferring to interpret or add meaning. Now you were an N too, you said, right?
Or yes.
Yeah. So that makes sense, right? For market researchers, I mean, that's what we sort of get paid to do, is to interpret and add meaning in general, right? Now, that's not to say that there aren't market researchers that are sensing. There were, and we can look at that in a bit. But this is by far the biggest driver we looked at here in terms of predicting, which type is more common in market research. The number two one was regarding decisions. And so when making decisions, do you prefer to first look at logic and consistency, or do you prefer to first look at the people and special circumstances? And this is thinking versus feeling. And so here's where you and I differ a bit. I'm in the first group that is a bit more logical. Some people might say that's like colder. I like to think I'm not cold. But you analytical, and you're more likely to consider people's special circumstances, maybe I guess, and again I'm not an expert on Myers-Briggs here, but kind of look at that. And I won't bother, for time's sake, we won't go into the other two, but there's big differences there as well. So let's move on. Here, we wanted to look at, so I was curious, we had asked in the survey, whether they consider themselves more quant versus more qual. And, you should have a grasp of both, of course, in market researcher. And client-side research have to, or arguably, do a little bit more of both of these, whereas suppliers tend to focus more on one or the other. But there are strong preferences for various reasons, I believe. And we found here, when we asked this question, that, and 60-40 split. And you could add, I guess, okay, was this, I'm trying to remember if this was also a text question. Maybe it was. I think it was. We asked, so people could have answered this any way they wanted to. And the way it played out was just slightly over half of market researchers said they were quant, and about 35% said they were qual. About 12%, answered something like, you should be both, or whatever, or what have you,
Mm-hmm.
or that they did other things. So, but this is pretty much the split, right? So let's just keep that in mind as we go on. I was curious then to see overlay quant versus qual on this Myers-Briggs thing. And so here we have the types. The bigger the node, the circle, the more prevalent the type. We saw INTJ, my type, was the biggest type. And then your type is in here somewhere too, I'm sure. Let's see, find it. Where is it? ENFJ, right there. Okay. And so this is the average sort of mark, whereas on the x-axis here, we're looking at which types claim that they did, more exclusively qual versus those who said
Right.
they did exclusively. Or you know what? I think this is mislabeled. This should be quant, and this should be qual. Yes, that's my snafu. Okay, so this is qual over here, and this is quant. Oh, I see.
Well, you got it as less quant.
Quant.
Less quant equals qual.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. I see. So it wasn't a mistake. So okay. So let's look at this bit more. Now here we've thrown in the sort of overarching the NTJ, right? So just looking at, so we can see which traits skew more popular. That's up the y-axis, more frequently mentioned, as well as bigger node, and also what skews more quant. And we can see that the quant researchers, I mean, if you're an INF, those INFPs that answered, and there was roughly about 20 at least of them, smaller type, but very frequently mentioning that they do almost exclusively quant here. Importantly, it's these are definitely all statistically significant here. If you're intuitive, you're thinking and judging, you are definitely working in quant more so likely. Introverted, a little bit more likely than extroverted, but it's not necessarily, they're both sort of skew more than average towards quant. Whereas sensing, this is a trait that sort of goes on the other side towards the qual, right? E and S, and we'll look at that a little bit more. Extroverted, I mean, it makes sense that extroverts are going to feel more comfortable spending their time talking to new people in a focus group, right? And get joy out of that, if you will, versus an introvert is going to want to sit in their cube or their office or what have you and look at data. So, and the same thing is sensing versus, let's go back, sensing, S, where is that, S versus N, is sensing is, do you prefer to focus, basically, I'm going to take it, like, just, sensing is taking information at its, as it comes out of the people's mouth, if you will, whereas N's have to freaking, think, oh, is this person really saying what they mean, or what have you. And so focus group, we saw that qual goes much more sensing. Let's move to the next slide. I'm sure, hopefully, we won't get hate mail. But this is, I think, this aligns with this idea. And again, we're just exploring this technique, this segmentation, if you will. So here we just zooming in on what we're seeing with more quant. It's that these types and these overall things. Whereas here, now we're looking at more the stuff that skews more qual, right? ES, I mentioned that, sensing and extrovertism. Now it looks like there's fewer in this data. It looks like there's fewer people who are doing more qual. So these are probably some hardcore focus group moderator, a bunch of those, right? That say that they're doing over 50% qual normally, whereas these are over here tend to be more mixed. more mixed, maybe with more and more mix of towards quant, right? Is the way. So it's not necessarily hard this or that, but yes, the N and T and J and I, that combo is going to be way towards the quant and vice versa. So why did we just spend so much time on a warm-up question that was sort of a fun throw? Was intended to be because, yeah, I guess, I mean, we already said it. I was just floored by the fact that so many people had internalized this 4-digit number for themselves, this segment type. And what does that mean? I think it made me think about what is innovation really, on the one hand. And I gotta say that Myers-Briggs, whatever they did, it's been successful, right? If you can get, whether or not it's super accurate, I believe it is. I mean, I've always been typed INTJ, so it's the repeatability is there for me at least. I got to question people who scrutinize it too heavy, because I mean the techniques that were used to build that segmentation, like any, are standard statistical techniques: factor analysis, cluster analyses, and so then you question the questions, and there are these polar scales, like do you prefer to go to parties, or do you prefer to stay home and read a book? Do you prefer to this and that? And but I think it's beyond that. It's something about this test resonated. This segmentation scheme has resonated with people. Maybe it's not the most useful segmentation in the world, but it is for the layperson the most useful segmentation in the world. So how can we apply that to the way we communicate our methodologies? I would have thought 16 segments with 14. I mean, I would never propose that to a company, or that a market researcher should. 16 segmentations. Holy cow! Clusters and segments. But that, and also I thought, hey, this shines some light on who maybe we're talking to when we're talking about quant research or qual researcher, and what their personality types are, and maybe that for you and me, who need to communicate and talk to other market researchers who are making decisions on whether to go with the different technique and so forth. What do they like? What makes them tick, and their persona? So that's why I spend so much time on that on this. What were your other takeaways here?
Well, I mean, it is interesting that a test that's 100 years old, which was disruptive at its time, still resonates and is still being used, certainly by anywhere from like high school guidance counselors to HR departments to this day, and folks are using it to figure out what careers best suit them. The fact that 50% actually remember their type is actually quite surprising, and I think to your point, Tom, of taking a full circle and saying like, hey, knowing who we are and what our kind of makeup is, this is a way for us to kind of look at ways to introduce innovation into our industry. Rather than, I've never been a big believer in pushing things on people. You have to kind of like understand their world a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so I think, these warm-up exercises that, as you put them, I think are actually have a lot of merit in terms of understanding how our industry is going to react to innovation and new methods.
Right. Yeah. It's fun. Sometimes we don't look at ourselves as, I was talking to he was CMO of one of the biggest market research companies in the world. I won't tell you which one. One of the top 5. And he had said to me once over coffee, I said, have you ever segmented market researchers?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we already do business with all market researchers. It just sort of, we don't need to segment. It was just one segment for him. So I was like, wow.
Really?
Okay.
Okay. Maybe that explains why CMOs are like the most endangered species of any profession.
Well, I mean, I like him. I respect him tremendously, the guy who said that. But I just felt like, wow, we're a little bit like the shoemaker's children. We often don't, and silly me, I was hoping to
Mm.
proposed at the time. It was Anderson. I was working at Anderson Analytics, and we were doing some segmentation work, and I was hoping to do a segmentation for him of the entire market research industry, right? But
Mm.
it didn't happen. But I've never done a segmentation of market research. We should, and maybe
Yeah,
that's something we at some point we should talk about getting
yeah. They should
a group
explore
together.
that with one of the trade industries sometimes, but we
Yeah.
digress.
Yes. Um, Innovation equals something new, disruptive, and excitement. So, again, just what we just discussed, yes, innovation is something new, but for it to be
Hmm.
disruptive, there has to be acceptance. And so that's, why we talked about this technique a bit and how we can get acceptance for our disruptive techniques. On to
Hmm.
innovation and methods. I mean, this was the more serious stuff. Got sidetracked quite a bit on this early stuff just for the fun. Department strengths and weaknesses. Um, so we asked these market researchers, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And in terms of strengths, the biggest one, right, is the experience. We all say we are very experienced, right? Person, right? This is machine learning. It's personnel is coming up there. Any mentions of staff, that kind of thing. Um, so we think we have good people working for us as well. And then we got less often mentioned, but also very much we consider strengths that our thinking on things, that we do good quality work, we're knowledgeable, understanding, that we're flexibility, very much a skill not mentioned by as many, but nobody mentioned flexibility as a weakness, obviously. Whereas,
Hmm.
whereas the negatives or weaknesses among market researchers, the biggest one was lack, and lack. Yes, it was lack of time and lack of size. It was just general also lack here of a budget. I mean, both supplier side and client side.
Hmm.
Um, that's what we complain about. That's what we see as our biggest weaknesses. I think there's something to that. I think the interesting thing is how do we all overcome those things, maybe, and is there anything we're missing? Um, here we're looking here. This is Odin Text running predictive analytics, sort of on what's most important drivers, and we see here flexibility is those who view themselves as or I'm sorry, this is what predicts the strength versus a weakness the most. So things in here, personnel, we're a little bit less sure. Those who mention flexibility, that's a clear strength. Personnel, maybe we wish we had a few, maybe those who run our companies, wish we had a little bit more staff in certain areas that have certain
Hmm.
expertise. So it's a little bit less
Right.
of a strength. Um, and size, this is a weakness, but not for all of us. Some people feel that maybe our teams are big enough, but certainly we lack resources. I think almost everybody, right? So this was a discussion we had in that session as well. Size, time.
Yeah, I've been hearing more and more about that, Tom, from research departments that feel that they're being cut back. They're being asked to do the same amount of research with less staff and no more additional research, no more additional budget. So that puts more stress on the system.
Yeah, yeah, and the argument now is like everything has to be done tomorrow for zero money,
Yep.
and they don't care
Hmm.
about. I mean, quality is not in here, but you know, quality is taking a back seat, and I, and people say tough luck if you're not innovative unless you can do all three things right. And quality is the only one
Yep.
that people are like seem to be willing to leave behind in many cases. It is crazy to me, and I think that it will be the death of this industry, if anything. Um, or those companies that think that that's okay. And I don't know. I've been
Mm,
seeing. I'm venting now a bit, but you know,
that's all right. Yeah. There is that sentiment that 80% reliable in a few days is better than 100%. You know, kind of understanding of the situation in a few weeks. That kind of mentality.
Yeah, but the mentality, the kind of insights that you get from that kind of instant coffee is going to be far less valuable than something that I mean, we see it with people who use Odin text often. You know, some market research supply, not most are good. There's some that are more forward looking, like your company, that really value what their actual customers are saying, and they're using our software to really get higher level insights, read between the lines, and really understand what's being driven, what the key drivers are for whatever KPIs they're looking at, sales or purchase intent or whatever. And then there's those other market researchers who are all thinking like, oh my God, you know, we got to get this survey fielded for $3 or less for the respondents. Who cares if they're really target respondents or not? An analyst can spend 2 hours on this. Open ends or not. We can't afford to code any of those. Or if we do, it's got to take less than 10 minutes and cost zero. And those that's I don't see how you can get anything of value. Whereas we see the other part, those who actually value their customers. That's what you see this more from the client side. I think they value their customers more, and I think those market research companies who are just focusing on instant coffee, I don't think it's going to be a bright future for them. But we'll see how that plays out. What we moved on to next was method experiences, negative, go-to, and interested. So these were 3 different questions, open ends again, merged into one and text analyzed. One was, what are methodologies that you have had a negative experience with? And I think we might have asked why, but or also just name the methodologies. And then we asked, what are your go-to methodologies? And then the third question was, which ones are you most interested in, understanding, learning more about, applying, and so forth. And so on that dimension or whatever, on the bottom here, we have on the left-hand side in red, we have methodologies that they have had worse experiences with. In the middle, we've got their go-tos. And all the way to the right, these are the things that they're most interested in learning more about. And so if we look in the middle, then you got surveys up here, the biggest one.
Yep, the old bread and butter.
Yep. And then over here to the right, we got in-person, in-depth. Obviously, they're talking about focus groups there.
Yeah, although you see focus groups off to the left there, Tom, with in the orange there, which is a little surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can sort of, there's like a span here that's sort of like go to, but maybe, people who are mentioning focus groups are like a little bit more likely to also mention them, that they had negative experiences with it. Whereas, so, we're kind of, analyzing 3 text questions here as one single visualization. So, whereas maybe with in-depth, maybe it's more popular than focus groups. So yeah, these are like one-on-ones versus focus groups. But let's move on. Let's see if we can. I think we've had some other visualizations here. So now we're sort of lumping up to a higher category. So here's qual and surveys. So now we've got qual. Remember we looked at that pie chart. In terms of how they answered that they skew, and how many are doing predominantly more one or the other, and we saw that there was more quant than qual. But here we have sort of qual being mentioned more often. Whether here online discussion boards, IDIs, focus group, any of that is being lumped together as qual here, as well as straight out mentions of qual. Versus here you got with concept tests, blah blah. So I'm like trying to figure out what can we tell very quickly. Bulletin boards, okay. This came out as a more often mentioned as a bad thing. Now that's technically qual too, but we left it separate because it was down here. Now I like, okay, as a quant, INTJ type of guy. If you were to force me to do focus groups, I would say let's do a bulletin board, and I like those things personally.
Yeah.
But I know focus group moderators have fought that tooth and nail. Some of them. What's your experience?
Yeah, I'm not as big a believer in the in-person focus group. It seems to me like this Mad Men kind of methodology left over from the '60s. Get 10 people from some sort of focus group database together in a nondescript industrial park and have them react to a topic guide. It seems to me you could be doing that on an asynchronous basis with the bulletin board. I think you get less, bias, and you can get more of a representative group. But apparently the crowd feels differently on that. But all things being equal, I think that there's something to be said for bulletin boards. But I guess folks here, at least who took this part of the survey, have not had really good experiences.
Well, again, it's not a lot of. I mean, it's fewer people mention bulletin boards, but when they mentioned it, it skewed more, towards the bad experience. And I think.
Yeah, I wonder if some of this, Tom, is are these like do-it-yourself kind of things that they got some software, they put it up and found the experience to be kind of crappy. You get what you pay for type thing.
I mean, we could drill down. I mean, if I was in the tool
No,
right now,
right.
I could have drilled into it and seen what people actually said. But I'm imagining these are people who are those moderators, like that like the face watching.
Well, that's
people's
true
expression.
too.
And yeah, because if I you're not going to get me out to go a group. I want more people. I want 50 or 100 or more. And I want to be able to export that data and run analyses like this on it. And, so that's my preference, but I think that's what we're seeing. Whereas over here to the right, what are we seeing? AI. This is what everybody wants to learn about the most, I guess. I don't think it's applicable for every market researcher. I mean, something we certainly are using quite a bit, but it is not a tool for everything. You got to use it when it makes sense in certain ways. But this is hot, right? That's why everybody's blogging about AI, machine learning, in everything. Even like I don't know, sample providers like, yeah, sure, you're using AI. But okay, let's move over to VR, AR, virtual reality, augmented reality. I have not. I mean, I understand what it is. I've seen it at a conference, like put on goggles and stuff. But I mean,
Yeah, we both did that.
we both did that together. Yeah. At IIEX. So what do you think? I mean, I don't know. It's I guess people really are interested.
I've never really seen the applicable research applications for VR, AR. I mean, it kind of looks to me like a fun video game experience to have during a conference. I mean, AI seems aspirational, but I think it's also a bit nebulous. Sometimes I think people might be thinking of automation too, which clearly with the the stress being with budgets and the need to do things faster. I think that may be why AI is being pursued as a way to get us part of the way there, without using people.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's kind of cool, sexy technology. It just seems that it's possibly more way out in many ways than AI, in my opinion. But by the way, I see we're over an hour. Are you okay, or do you have to run to a meeting, or can we finish up a few more slides?
Yeah, I'm good till 1:15.
Okay, cool.
I got another. Actually, I can go to 1:20.
All right, cool. So I guess I'll move on from this slide then. But I mean, text analytics, my favorite subject, came up third here towards the want to learn more about. Yet, it's getting closer to the go-to. Well, the go-to would be the average is, I forget the scale is. So it's the go-to is probably around here, right?
So if we did this exercise maybe about 3 years ago, text analytics might have been further to the want to learn.
Yeah.
So you're moving into your sweet spot, Tom.
Yeah, I want to be here. We'll get
you just
there.
need to triple the size of the node.
Yeah. But it's
and
moving in the right
get it
direction.
up there.
I mean, it's mobile. I mean, that's funny that's even mentioned. I mean, mobile. God Lord. I mean, they've been talking about mobile for like is it 50 years? No, we haven't had mobile phones for that long, but it feels like
It
it.
just seems that way,
Yeah, and
right?
like, come on, it
In the
shouldn't.
moment.
So yeah, the idea with mobile, like, yes, technically all surveys ideally should hopefully work on a mobile at this point. I don't take surveys anymore. I think, unless they're a 3-question survey with an open end, text analytics, hint hint.
So you
Forget.
wouldn't even have taken this survey.
Heck no. But no, I wouldn't. It was 10 minutes, and I apologize to everyone who took it. We got a little out of control on next
That's all right.
survey. I
You'll
promise.
you'll you'll make it shorter next year.
Yeah, 5 minutes or less. I promise. Um, and well, big data is interesting. It's like not mentioned as frequently anymore, and it's moved to this
No.
way, and down here. This would have been one. I feel like that would have been here if we asked this survey a couple years ago. So it's moved. There are few people using it more as their go-to, but it's much less so, and that's what I expect. Market researchers, for the most part, don't have what's considered big data. But all right,
Hmm.
let's move on to the next one. And so here's more of it's the same data visualized a bit differently. Still 3 open ends merged together, but here we have a bar chart. And how is this sorted? I think it's sorted based on the difference between negative and desire to learn. Realizing the desire to learn and negative are not necessarily the polar opposites, right? Uh, you know, we could have asked, what's your favorite methodology, but that's more like go-to. But we decided to sort of visualize that in the middle. So anyway, what we're looking at is qual has the biggest mentions of anything else, and it looks like there's a slightly bigger group that have had a negative experience with qual, that are down on qual, than are up on qual, and these are the people that they want to learn more about qual. I feel like I know everything about qual, even though I don't do much qual. Although I think there's a confusion in the market research industry where a lot of people call survey open ends qual. To me, it's
Mm.
qual is focus groups or IDIs, transcripts. But I think that's the first
Hmm.
semantics. Um,
Yeah, qual actually just if you allow me a 1 minute rant on this
yeah.
one too, Tom. It seems to me like it hasn't moved with the times.
Hmm.
You look at the want to learn more, the AI, VR, text analytics. These are things relying on machine learning computers,
Mm.
algorithms, etc. Real cool stuff. And qual, to me, it's amazing. It must be the lore of the M&M peanuts or something, because it's like we're still doing these in-person groups and these, and it doesn't seem to me like it's evolved as much as it could.
Hmm.
And maybe that's why there's not as much of a desire to learn, because what is there to learn?
Are you going to get hate mail for that?
Send it to the attention of Tom Anderson.
um, no, I have to agree with you. I mean, and I've seen actually some people claim that they do AI on qual. The problem, I mean, if you know anything about
Mm.
AI, it requires training data, lots of training data, and good training data. And those are
Mhm.
3 things that are going to be missing. I mean, to do it's about pattern recognition, statistics, machine learning, predictive analytics. It's just not possible with traditional qual. It will be possible, and it is possible with more qual, if you
Yeah.
will. But
Right.
that's not.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
mean, to finish my point, I think of qual as being exploratory research to answer the whys out of all the data that we've got, and then I just think that there are opportunities for it to
Hmm.
evolve more than it's evolved so far.
Right. And so here, moving over again, biggest sorting. I get. Now I'm trying to remember how this is sorted, but you can see bulletin boards here. Some people have tried it and had a negative experience, and some people it's their go-to method. Nobody feels like they need to learn more about it. So what does this mean to me? People know what bulletin boards are, and more so, like twice as many then are saying they had a negative experience are calling it their go-to, um, even though it's a small overall, right? And so again, I go back to the analysis from the visualization before about bulletin boards. This is probably the hardcore qual folks saying like, no, I need this. I need the M and M's and need to see the expressions on their face. Whereas
Hmm.
this group is maybe more like you and I in here. But it's not something that's a mystery, right? We know how this works. so that makes me wonder about what is here, who these people are. Maybe they're more younger researchers who don't know exactly what a qual group is, but okay, or an IDI is. But let's move on. Segmentation. By the way, I love, I think qual has its place as like a brainstorming. I'll probably get hate mail for saying that too, but I have to say I'm more quant. Segmentation, we got here also. This is interesting to me. Segmentation is something I love personally. We don't do enough of it. I mean, we don't do it anymore.
Yeah, we talked about that at the very beginning, right? Segmentation of our own industry.
Right. So, not surprising that more people don't want to learn about it. I think it's so cool. I mean, it is understood techniques, of course. But
yeah, maybe that's it. There's nothing new under the segmentation sun.
Right. Conjoint, God, this thing, AMA has an event called the ART Forum, Advanced Research Techniques Forums, which is a bunch of conjoint eggheads getting together. Hey, I respect all of them. And we did do a poster session there a few years ago on text analytics. In fact, conjoint is kind of cool, but I was surprised to see it this big. Not everything fits into a perfect little conjoint choice model, in my opinion, but interesting little.
Yeah, not unless it's 45 minutes long, unfortunately.
Yes, and that's I think you hit on my biggest pet peeve, that I don't feel like I can trust data at that point, but with I think text analytics has a role to play in the future with conjoint, but people are so like siloed there, like they just want to do it the way they do it. Regression, interesting here. A few people but nobody, I don't know what to make of this. It's like segmentation. These are important statistical techniques that all market researchers, in my opinion, should know about, but yet nobody wants to learn about them. I don't know what to make out of that. Factor cluster is in that group too, obviously. Now all these things were mentioned by market researchers, of course. These are actually, they could have said anything. These are from text open ends. These are not Likert scales. They're just trying to remind people who are listening to us. Surveys over here, it looks like qual, except over here a little bit less often. I'm trying to remember how I would interpret that. It's just that I think it's that there's more. Everybody does qual, almost a little bit of qual, whereas not all qual researchers do quant, right? But most quant research do some qual, and that's why this is the biggest bar. And that's how to that's in case, but it doesn't mean that there's more focus groups going on than surveys necessarily. I think that's not the case, as you saw from the pie chart. So that's why these bars are the sizes they are. Concept test, neuroscience. This is one, green and red, no gray. This is a where was that on the other chart? Neuroscience. Do you see it?
I thought it was somewhere in the middle.
There it is,
right on the bottom there.
Nobody using it, and so
it sure gets a lot of play at conferences, but nobody's using it.
It used to, I don't know. Have you gotten an MRI or CAT scan at your office yet? Or
No, I have always walked past those booths, which are offering the opportunity. So,
there's a lot of hokey smoky mirrors around that. It was a big thing, people in shiny suits getting up.
Sure.
PhDs.
Well, people lie, so why not just see what neurons are firing when we show this part of our concept test, and get
a lot of these quote unquote neuroscience experts have come under fire. I'm trying to remember one of them that spoke at the TMRE, in fact, who wrote a book where I had also interviewed as a young guy. I don't know if you remember his name, but he was called out for plagiarism and stuff. And then there was the other guy, the Danish guy, also, I think I might have interviewed him, but also a famous author. He was called out by a more serious PhDs, researchers on that, just strapping a few electrodes up to somebody's head is not going to give you, very accurate results, right? And so you've got these guys at MIT who are actually putting people into a MRI and CAT scan, which is not cheap, and they're getting very limited insights. I mean, they're cool insights, right? but it's just not practical to see, like, should I make my M&Ms blue or green? Let's
Right,
throw
right,
it,
right.
so
Yeah, if you're trying to get people's reactions to a commercial, it's not really practical from a cost perspective.
So yeah, and so the way I read this, everybody who's tried neuroscience has had a bad experience. Nobody's using it as a
Well,
go-to,
yep, but they
and
still want to learn some more about it, huh?
there's a few newbies who haven't been exposed to it yet who will soon move to that red group. At least at this
So yeah,
stage. Yeah.
right. They're going to go from green to red soon enough, but they haven't been exposed yet.
Yeah. Whereas ethnography, we got sort of the opposite thing going on. People learning about it, and then
Hmm.
people using it as a go-to. Small group in total, but ethnography is kind of
Yeah.
really cool.
I think the rise of online ethnography has helped too, and that part of the
Hmm.
mobile experience. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone, video phone. They can kind of journal about their experience. So yeah,
Hmm.
I've heard a lot more clients interested in that.
Big data. We got some people who thought it was for them and it wasn't. They found out that a survey to 500 people isn't big data.
So what's the term, Tom? Is it big data or machine learning?
So AIO's over here. You kind of, in my opinion, you kind of need bigger data to before you can think about using AI. You need,
Hmm.
but I mean, AI can be used on smaller data once you built the algorithm on good, big, nice training data. The problem is there's never usually a lot of that around for a lot of apps. Um, but there's definitely there's definitely some correlation, for lack of a better word, between these two. This is just
Hmm.
newer, but AI is very interesting. I just don't like the way people are talking about it. People haven't really don't know much about it, and we even have different opinions on it here internally between some guys I work with who have PhDs in computer science. Are much more stricter in terms of how they what they consider AI versus what others what I do. But we'll come back. I plan on blogging more about that in the near future.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it really is interesting in the sense that nobody seems to have any experience with it yet, neither negative or as a go-to method. It's just completely aspirational.
AI, yeah. I'm looking. It looks like there's a tiny sliver of gray there, though, and
Oh
not
yeah, yeah. Oh,
not much sliver in red.
you're
But yeah,
right.
but you're right. But you're right. It's green. It's new. It's a new shiny toy. I think it is a much cooler new shiny toy than this neuroscience, and we are using it with our text analytics. More and more as it makes sense. The problem is it's not like sci-fi movies where like some robot comes out and does everything for you. You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
you got to use it as a real serious tool, and you got to have people. It's got to fit the need. Um, Here's mobile. I don't know what to say about mobile except mobile's. All right, I'll say this: mobile surveys should be ideally being able to take in either form. I think obviously, but what I haven't seen with mobile is I was interested in geofencing, like and incorporating that
Right.
data and like
Yep.
en masse and text analyzing, SMS mess, whatever, and that has not happened. So I think when market research mentioned mobile, they're talking about God, how their survey is showing up. I mean, like, is that what mobile means? Then I'm less interested. That should be a given. But
Hmm.
and here's my favorite. Now look at this. Some people have had a negative experience. There's a big
Obviously, they haven't used Odin text.
exactly because then they would be in this sliver. No, so a lot of people still interested in learning it. It's still
Yeah.
not a huge bar, but actually bigger than AI, bigger than big data, bigger than because it has applications. I mean, we are using it with not focus group data. It's too small. But survey data,
Right.
discussion board data, bigger boards, community keys is relevant for text. But I
Hmm.
see there has been bad people. Just like in neuroscience, there was more bad people in neuroscience. Obviously, there has been some of my competitors. Again, don't want to point fingers specifically, but people who overpromised and said that hey, it can be good for anything and it's the only thing, and like God forbid those people who there's a confusion between social media monitoring and text analytics. Text analytics is broader, can be used on different things. Social media monitoring, usually just Twitter,
Right.
need to be separated. But this is a powerful technique, and you'll see that I believe it's going to be growing.
Well, you look at the previous thing, talk about the stress, with lack of people, maybe previous tedious methods in terms of analyzing open ends. Who's got time to do that? So,
Right.
you're bringing something to the party that, via, analytics, automation, maybe even at some point a little AI,
Yeah.
So I can see why you folks want to learn more about it.
Yeah, well, these two AI and text analytics, there's definitely some overlap here, and one can lend the other. Goes both ways.
Yeah.
And then we have the VR/AR. This is still very new, and some people, I guess, have actually tried it and had a bad experience. So, I think, we're going to have difficulty go to. We had just had a discussion on that, and then wrapped up. And I know, thanks for spending so much time with me today. But I think it was fun. We weren't joking around as much as we normally do when we get together. but I think
well, we had some data to cover, so
yeah, exactly.
So
Well,
so it we'll make up for it next time.
sounds good, and I'm sure I'll see you. Hopefully I'm sure I'll see you soon, probably at a conference. Maybe Miami's coming up next. Sounds like for you.
Yeah. If you if you decide to go, I'll certainly let you buy me a beer.
Yes. Yeah, I think
I'm good that way, Tom.
I'd like to pull the trigger on that if I can. I think it's a nice event down there, the CEO Summit. Anyway, if not, I'll see you in New York. There's I think in February there's another conference I'll probably see you at. Well, thanks everybody else for joining Kevin and I today. Hopefully our banter didn't distract you and was helpful in terms of analyzing these results. I think there's a lot more in here, and there's more questions that we didn't get to analyze. Again, this was just quick top line prepared the night before our TMRE session, and but I think it's when we get there's more data in this survey actually. When we have time, we might come back to it, but I think we're going to start by publishing this on the blog, and I would love to hear your thoughts on what we said today. And please don't send us any hate mail for anything we said if we didn't sound positive enough on your methodologies. There's room for everyone here in market
That's
research.
right. If Tom is a bit of a provocateur, so send anything negative in his direction. But I think, Tom, this is it's interesting in the sense of, like, I think we do need to do a little bit more segmentation of our industries, understand what some of the really go into this a bit more and understand some of the barriers to innovation and disruptive innovation in our industry, and where folks want to go. So I think this is a good first step.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin, and thanks everyone for watching, and look forward to seeing your comments so we can reply to them and have some discussion about this. We'd love to hear your opinions. Thanks so much for joining us. And